Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are back for another edition on day 19 of the MCO at home. And today we have a very, very special VIP guest who is none other than Datuk AT Kumararajah. Welcome, Datuk.
Good evening, Bruce.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's our pleasure. So, Datuk, you have been busy, MCO, I followed you on Facebook. You are in and out of Putrajaya, forever championing the cause of the SMEs and Mikey. And other than Mikey, you have got your business. Perhaps you can just keep us up to date on what keeps you busy and have been keeping you busy during this period.
Nothing much. I mean, I've been at home all the while, now 19th day, except I think I went about 3 or 4 times to Putrajaya.
Yeah, that was what I was referring to.
Especially in the last week, I must say. Right. So, and coming back is as a longer process. My wife insists that she's got a lot of SOPs before I come into the house. So besides that, everything else is normal.
Okay. So, 19 days at home. What keeps you awake at night? Other than Netflix?
I think, besides Netflix, actually, I've kind of also lost the normal diurnal. We kind of, our normal biorhythm. I can't really tell whether we are, what date until I really look into the computer and say, oh yeah, okay, today is the 5th of April.
Right.
Other than that, I think March, we kind of tidied over. We could keep staff. I keep my staff on a Zoom call 3 or 4 days once. But reality will start sinking into the month of April, because month of March, most of us would have survived. It's only 12 days, right? So it's like an extended public holiday, which is not very rare in Malaysia, right? So we do have 10 days holidays. So it's like a 12-day holiday. But now coming to April, it's really going to be tough because a good part of April is gone, and we're not really sure how far this MCO is going. Again, realities of paying payrolls to make sure things go well and to meet commitments, it's going to be very, very tough. And that's, if not only me, I'm sure it's keeping many people, whether you're employee, employers, daily wages, everybody, right? So I think whole of Malaysia is awake.
Yeah, you're right. You mentioned about it. It's affecting everyone. The COVID-19 pandemic and the MCO is hit everyone. But there are some who are more hit than others. Do you see this observation, and can you just share what you see?
I think over the last, Bruce, I'm sure you've been following, I also know you from the chamber circle, and I'm sure you know how institutions or the chamber organizations or business organizations have been taking one viewpoint, how public in general have taken a viewpoint, how government in its own viewpoint seems to have trying to see where is the balance between, capitalist approach and kind of a socialist approach to make sure that there is food on the table. So I think that's...
in a nutshell, can you explain, Datuk, what do you mean by capitalist approach and a socialist approach, and what are the various competing interests that we are exactly seeing at play right now?
So I think the first 10 days, right, everything was all right. So because people are getting used to, this is, I'm sure those of us who are in the 40s and even definitely anybody who's younger than us, right, who's never seen this kind of restricted order movements. We never lived in those eras where there is all this. So the first 10 days was like a holiday. And everything was hunky-dory well until the government started announcing the stimulus package. And I think when Tan Sri Muhyiddin announced this package the following week, 10 days ago, I think that kind of hit home the fact that, okay, there is a huge difference between the have and the have-nots. And I think government, yes, the first stimulus package was 20 billion. Many people were pushing for the second round. The government did come across with a very huge number, quite an unprecedented number, right?
So 250 billion, yeah.
So that's a huge number. Anybody who's doing a back of envelope calculation was looking at 70, 80, 90. I did mention 120 using historical numbers, right? So using what we did in, say, 2007, 2009 crisis, if you take those historical numbers, we should be doing only about $120 billion. I think government pulled out all stops through the fiscal budget story, into the rubbish, and said, doesn't matter, we pull out all stops, we don't have to be very disciplined, but we must make sure that everybody is taken care. And as we move forward into a stimulus package, which unfortunately doesn't have an expiry date. So many of those crises that we went through even many ago, we know that, okay, there is a 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, whatever. This is something that we really don't know. So it's like an unknown unknown. So this unknown is what is putting a lot of this even revitalizing measures not seem to be having the same kind of effect that we want, simply because the timelines are not stable.
Yeah.
So doesn't it need to survive for the next 3 months, or do we need to survive for the next 6 months? Nobody can tell, right? So government is also not in a position to really tell. Business owners also never in a position to say, even if the MCO is lifted on the 15th of April, would businesses bounce back immediately? No, the number is anywhere between 3 to 3 years, 3 months to 3 years before things come back to normal. And we will definitely be hit by all the regional issues and the global issues. And every country has been hit. So everybody is going to take a step back. Everybody is going to be careful. Nobody's going to spending. It's going to be tough. So I think government in that way, right? So that's my approach. That's what I also think what government is doing. I think the first round, when I say the first round, I wouldn't discard the first stimulus package that Mahathir announced on the 27th of February. You must take that 20 billion and put it into what Tan Sri Muhyiddin announced 10 days ago.
Right.
So if you take that first 250, I think the first goal is to make sure that the bottom 40 community and the very fragile, or those living on the fringes of poverty line, and those who are actually living below the B40 income levels, and especially the household income levels of below 4,000, should be taken care of first. I think that's a very fair way that the government is looking at, because now the idea is to make sure that you have enough food on the table. Full stop. Yes, I mean, the next immediate question after that Thursday, Friday was like, so yeah, people can put food on the table, but how is the SME supposed to pay salaries? I think that was our biggest issue, right? So that $600 from per peso for those earning below 4,000 didn't seem to make much of economical sense, right? So though government said it will cover 3.5 million workers, and the budget that they're going to spend is close to 5.9 billion ringgit, I don't think many business owners really thought that was a fair deal. There were many counter proposals that have come across after that. I think many of that, which is being evaluated at this point in time as we speak, I think tomorrow, day after, in the next 2 to 3 days, maybe as early as even tomorrow, we might have some good announcements coming through. But I think, to be fair, Bruce, I mean, business owners have always taken a view of government is only taking care of B40 and we're not taking care of us. I don't think it's a zero-sum game. I think the more level-headed among the business owners, and I think many chamber organizations have also taken that approach of, we're not questioning the government's need or impetus to do for the bottom 40, to do for the employee segment, and to do for those who are living on the fragile fringes of the economy. I think that is something that is given.
Yep.
Now we are okay, now you've taken care of the demand side of the curve. But what about the supply side? So this Makcik Kia concept of Prihatin stimulus, right? So Makcik Kia now has been taken care of. She's got some money in hand. She can be able to tide herself for the next 3 months. But where would she go to shop? Because if the supply side is not taken care of, if the SMEs don't come back into business, if the supply chain of the SMEs is not secured, and they run into a cash tight situation, prices will escalate, inflation will kick in, and Makcik Kia's 4,000 plus ringgit will now look smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
And then comes that, it becomes a negative cycle for her and also for the businesses. So I think government is looking at a phased approach of now talking about the next stimulus package will be a SME stimulus package. Though the first round, they did say that we have got $100 billion set aside for businesses and all.
Right, but why didn't they why did they phase it out? Do you think it was a deliberate attempt to phase it out? I mean, we can see the first phase, the one that was announced by Tun Dr. Mahathir in his final days as the our Prime Minister, was addressed specifically at sectors that are really, really hit, such as the tourism and hospitality industry. And the Prihatin one that we saw 10 days ago, they said no one is left behind, but there were obviously some sectors were asked to just hang on right at the back. They are not left out, but just hang on, focus on the makcik kiosks. But that wasn't mentioned then. You know, was it? Do you think there was a case? It was deliberately not mentioned. Was it an afterthought that the SME community then came up and they say, okay, let's do a special cabinet committee?
I would give the benefit of the doubt to the government in the sense that that was the thought of a phased approach. Whether that was communicated out as like, look, you know, this is the first approach, and we will take care of the business community, and we'll come back with something for the business community in the second announcement. Maybe whether that was communicated as such, I mean, that's. I'm sometimes it's apa yang tersurat and apa yang tersirat lah. So we'll have to take it the fact that, you know, I think the intentions were there. Maybe it was not well communicated out. But I think to be fair to the government, in the just 10 days, right? So since last week's announcement and up to now, I think many engagements have taken place. That's whether it's national organizations or small business chambers or specific sectors, specific communities. I think everybody's interest has been looked at, and for the last 10 days, I think a lot of engagement has happened both at MOF level, Economic Action Council, MKN. So I believe there is something good that should come to satisfy the SME community.
Right. I think we can't fault the government, and it's true. Right after the Prihatin, the doors were open, the channels were open for further engagements with the SME industry, and not only the SME, the business community as well. And I like the way you faced it. Take care of the general populace, the B40s, and probably the M40s, and the likes of makcik kiosks before we study certain more medium and longer term strategies, you know, during this COVID period. Now, let's look at the employment or the business sector. Which sector you think is most hard hit by this pandemic, you know, and its effects? You mentioned SMEs. Is that the case?
No, that's the thing, right? So again, I think in Malaysia, and you're used to this story also, right? So everybody is an SME, because we take the view that 98% or 98.5% to be exact of all companies in this country are SMEs. So really everybody you see as SMEs. But I think we must look at the number a little bit more carefully, right? So if you say 1 million companies exist in the country, the number is about 900 or 907,000 plus. But say if you take a ballpark figure of 1 million companies, of the 1 million companies, 988,000 plus is SMEs. Now, of that, 76% are actually micro businesses. Now, they're totally a very different animal to take care of. You cannot equate that 36%, which is about close to 700,000 companies, and say, for example, the KK Marts of the world and the mom and pop type of kedai runcit that we see in our neighborhoods are the same level.
Yes.
Right? You cannot. So even though in the same business, they're doing retail, provisional stuff, but you cannot equate both of them. You cannot equate the 7-Eleven. You cannot equate that to the kedai mamak that we see outside our shops. You cannot equate the Manhattan Fish Mart to the Pelita restaurants, or even you can't even equate Pelita to the single owner mama shops that you find all over the place, right? So there is a huge difference, and we cannot put like a one-stop center or one size fits all. And that, I think, maybe a little bit of tweaking is needed, even in the numbers that government is talking about. So they, for example, right? So I did put up this argument to YB Tengku that day and said, YB, you say there is $5 billion in the special relief fund. But look at the number we're talking about, right? So we're looking at SMEs. So who's supposed to qualify SMEs? So if you say $5 billion have been set aside for SMEs, they are actually only talking about 280,000 companies, so which is about 300,000 companies. But 700,000 companies are out there, which are micro businesses, for only can avail of 700 million ringgit, which is set aside in BSN. So to look at it from a 30,000 feet view, it looks like 700,000 companies only got 700 million, whereas 300,000 companies only got $5 billion. I mean, if you go down to the street, right? So we can be talking like this and say, look, you know, we're all SMEs and we are okay. But if you take the micro businesses, they are fragility, they are high risk, they're more cash trapped, they are more, they have a lower lifespan than us, than many SMEs. So they need to be pumped up more, and that 700 million ringgit may not be enough for micro businesses as such. So even that is one argument. Then you say, okay, there is enough money, $5 billion set aside in a special relief fund, and another $6.8 billion set aside in what they call all economic activity fund under Bank Negara. Now, even if you take that 6.8 plus this 5 billion, you're looking about 11.8, 12 billion ringgit. Now, is the 12 billion ringgit easy to do? No. That's I think one I won't say mistake, right? So, but that's a different approach. The government, for some unfortunate reason, has taken the business as usual approach. This is crisis. This is not something that, you know, the business community wants. This is not budget. This is not budget 2020. So where you can take your time, roll out, you can, you know, put in all the rules and regulations and see and wait for feedback and maybe tweak it as and when you get feedback. Yeah. No, this is crisis. Just like how when we went into MCO 19 days ago, Majlis Keselamatan Negara took charge, right? So now we don't have 35 ministers speaking. You don't find everybody making their own decisions. All powers are vested in Majlis Keselamatan Negara. Yep. So that's the crisis situation. But why, when we take crisis mode, when we implement MCO, but we don't take the same crisis mode when we implement the relief measures? So the stimulus package must also take the same crisis mode. Example, you got $5 billion special relief fund. Why do you need to be given out to 15, 16 commercial banks? Why can't one single institution within the government fraternity, maybe Bank Negara Malaysia, or maybe one single institution? 5 billion ringgit is very small. If you look at the capital size of many of these commercial banks. Why can't they just put it under one single entity, have one single window, and have one single criteria, and use it like a crisis fund, and not apply all things? I'm sure you know that better than me, Bruce, but we also, I think, Datuk Michael Kang of SME Association did a survey. We in National Chambers did a survey. Everybody's survey comes back and saying that, look, the banks are only loaning to their own customers. They are applying the same credit CETOS ratings that they usually do. They're applying all the same rules and regulations. They in fact ask you for the 2449 and MNA back again. I'm banking with the same bank. The bank still asks me the same thing. I actually say, look, my company secretary is on leave. Where am I supposed to get the document? And then anyway, nothing has changed.
Yeah. And I heard they haven't been answering the phone calls and all that as well, you know.
Correct. So, you know, the survey that they did last week, right? So the survey they did last week, approval rates are only at about 5%. Rejection rates at about 30%. Awaiting answer is the balance 65, which is, that means 2/3 of those people are actually waiting still for an answer. And banks are still somehow tying back your working capital needs to some sort of a formulation that they have, and many businesses don't seem to exceed 200 to 300,000, even successful ones. And that's not how the crisis fund should work. The crisis fund, and every bank has got a different value. So you go to CIMB has got one criteria. You go to Maybank has different criteria. The foreign banks have got totally different criteria. Why use them? Can't we just have one single window? And I think that's one big ask that all of us want. Have one single window for crisis funds.
Thank you. for that. So again, back to the original the question that I mentioned. So right now, you feel that there is no one size that fits all. That's what you're saying, because you have got the micros that are fragmented, and I think Makcik Kia belongs to that category. And you've got SMEs that take 10 years to build. There's a system, and these are the sectors that we need to protect, because they give employment to more than close to 70% of the population, and this is the segment we spend. Yeah, right.
That's million people. Yeah,
and I think the solution to keep everyone afloat during this extraordinary crisis, it's a crisis that none of us were prepared for. We couldn't foresee it coming so quickly. And you are saying that the MKN, or the National Security Council or Committee, right? They should step in and they themselves dole out. Do they have the infrastructure to do so? Perhaps one of the reasons they go to the banks is if we look at the 250 billion, that amount of money comes from the banks. They do not come from the government. So really, they are not touching on the coffers from MOF. They are using bank funds. And secondly, banks have got that system and infrastructure that is already set up. Don't you think it's more expedient if the MKN could have just issued clear instructions of, say, this is the approval criteria, here are the limits of what you can or cannot do. It doesn't affect the CCRIS or CTOS. You don't have to look at the forms 24 or 49 or any other company documents. Do you think perhaps this kind of tweaks could have taken place?
Actually, that's the thing, right? So what I meant just now was like an MKN kind of an approach. So it should not, I mean, not necessarily MKN, but Bank Negara has always done that special relief debt, debt resolution scheme, which they've always had, right? So why can't Bank Negara say, I have one single criteria? Now, if you read, right, so it's no big secret. All those letters that Bank Negara has sent to all the CEOs of all the bank, whether it was the special relief fund, I mean, they talked about the FAQs, or whether it was 2 days, 3 days ago, where they summed up everything else. I mean, everything is public knowledge. Everybody gets a copy of it faster than I think the government gets a copy. And if you read the tone of those letters to all the bank CEOs, they are at best pleading. Bank Negara governor, the deputy governor, makes a very good plea to the bank CEOs and says, look, I have allowed you leeways, I've allowed you statutory requirements which are lower. I've made sure that you have enough, you're flushed with funds. I've made sure that there is $30 billion in the system, and I'll give you all the leeways. You can tweak here, tweak there. I'll give you all the jalan you need, but please help the SMEs and loan out this SRS. Whereas the banks, on the other hand, I mean, I think they're being prudent, right? So if I run a bank, I'll probably do the same thing. But again, banks are treating these funds just as business as usual, which should not be the case. Banks should take a very crisis approach and says, okay. So I think one proposal, right, Bruce, that many of us, and I think even National Chamber and MRCA and everybody else has put up. I think even the special relief fund, right? So should be broken into two different things. One is the working capital needs. So the working capital needs, you probably use a criteria, but don't use your bank's normal criteria. Use a criteria of either you take the 6 months weighted average of the company's turnover, and you give a percentage of that as the working capital needs of the company. So when this SME comes back into business, or even as they run their operations for now, they probably need that much. So you take, say, a 60% weighted average of their last 6 months and give that as working capital at that same loan concept, which is for 3.5%, 5.5 years, right? But then again comes the other bit. Now, is it prudent for companies, regardless of whether micro or even SMEs, to borrow and finance operating cost, which is not generating or not profit generating? It just doesn't make business sense, right? So who takes money to pay for bills? how can I go and borrow and pay for bills? How do I borrow and pay for utility when I'm not using to generate profits? Why am I taking money to pay rentals of my premises, which I'm not using to generate any income? So I think the fixed costs. So I think the proposal that we have is rental, utilities, and payroll. Government must take up that as a grant. And the number is anywhere between 50 to 75. I suppose anybody looking at Canada suddenly says 75. You know, some more reasonable people think you do half, I do half. You know, some people come up with the 60% number. So the number is anywhere between 50 to 75% of that fixed cost. Payroll, utility, and rental costs must be picked up by the government in a grant, not as a loan, because it doesn't make sense. I take it a loan, where am I supposed to pay it back from?
Right.
And I think, to be fair, I think the government is contemplating on a model like that. But how far they will come back with an answer, because, you know, when everybody is very open, whether it is TOPA, whether it is Tengku Zafrul, whether it's the Economic Action Council, you know, they all have been very forthcoming and I think very understanding. But end of the day, when everybody goes back, you know, into their own office and then start crunching some of these numbers, and then they start looking at, okay, once we crunch these numbers and look this side and say, okay, where is the money for this? Do we have it? I'm not sure. Do we have it not? So that's the thing, right? So whenever they
the thing was, these conversations were already there, even on the eve of the MCO. If I remember, on the 17th, you know, the chambers and the associations, they delivered a petition or memo of sorts to the Prime Minister, right? And perhaps not in this degree of detail as you have explained, but pretty much the essence of it was already brought there. And then there was a little bit of a disappointment when the Prihatin stimulus was announced, because not many of these points were actually materialized in that stimulus budget. Do you think there's hope again? Because right now they seem to be listening, they are engaging. So what is the feedback from there? Yeah.
So that's the thing, right? So, for example, you take wages. Just now we spoke a lot about the fixed cost. So I think government is looking at some sort of, I give you a grant model for the fixed cost, whether it is for your payroll, whether it's for your utilities, or whether you're for rental. I give you a grant, you pay it back 3 months, 6 months, and then we see. So government takes up a percentage, the company pays a percentage, which is a fair deal. Or even the wages. Now, whether that's 600 ringgit, so that 600 ringgit, if you look at it in terms of coverage, that 600 ringgit only covers their estimate, government's estimate is about 3.3 million workers, which is below 4,000. So that 3.3 million workers, out a budget of 5.9 billion ringgit from the government. But what I think many companies feel is, one, 600 ringgit is too little. At least do 1,002, because if you take the median pay of SME workers out there, it's 2,500 ringgit. So at least you do half, we do half. So government picks up 1,200, we do 1,200. 1, 2, you cannot come with restrictions in terms of, you know, only if you do this, only if you do that. I think that's a little bit like asking you to fight with your hands tied behind your back. I think government should give that leeway on a mutually agreeable need between the employees and employers to negotiate lower pays, right? And I don't think this is the time to throw the book at you and say, look, you know, you must do this because this is what the labor law says, this is what the act says and all that. So those acts, labor laws and all, they are all business as usual, like, right? So we are in crisis, so we don't have to. I mean, even the devil can quote the scriptures now, if you need to be.
Yeah.
So now is not the time to quote the act and says, oh, the act says this is that. So because I always see, right, I'm sure you're reading also, I've always got two-side opinion. One legal practitioner says no, government cannot impose. One legal practitioner says no, government can impose. I suppose everybody after this will think like, okay, I screw it. It doesn't matter. I do what I can. I'll meet you in labor court, or I'll go to industrial court and see you. I don't think that's what we should do. We should allow the companies to come to a mutual agreement with our employees.
We hear your point, Datuk. But the question is, do the powers that be, how receptive are they towards this idea that we are in the middle of a crisis? this is a pandemic. This is, times that we have not seen before, and it calls for extraordinary measures. It's not business as usual. Are they listening to this, and how receptive they are?
You mean when you say they means who?
The powers that be, those who sits on the EAC, the cabinet, and the cabinet committees. Yeah,
I think they are, to a very large extent.
That's great.
It is only a problem of, is it affordable to us?
Right.
Is it affordable to us at this point in time? That's a big question. Even if I have an intent to do it, is there enough for me to do? Do I have enough in my pocket?
Which is why they turned to the banks, and that they could only plead the banks to roll out such SRS.
Yeah. So, but I think we will definitely meet somewhere in between. Like I said, our ask is 60%. Government is at $600. I think there'll be some middle point at somewhere, and that has to be within the first week or 10 days of April, because month of April, once you go into the third week, salary commitments, payrolls need to be updated. So I think in the next 3 to 4 days, I mean, some say cabinet, but I believe there was a meeting today. So definitely EAC meeting tomorrow. So you must expect some announcements on Monday, Tuesday, and maybe in installments again.
Right. Okay. There is an opposing view, even from our business community. We can find them on online interviews, statements made on their social media feeds, and so on. That says that, so what if the SMEs collapse or run out of money? They should die. We should only let the very, very strong survive this time of crisis. You mentioned like it's a time of war, so there will be casualties of war. So let's not save everyone. And I believe our Prime Minister did also mention that they would only rescue the viable ones, the ones that are worth rescuing. What are your views on that? And that government should not step in and offer, you mentioned, grants to 50-75% of workforce across the board. So which are the companies worth saving, which are not? And you mentioned it's pretty fragmented out there, from micros to SMEs with even several hundred millions in terms of sales per year. What are your views on that?
So that's the thing, right? So I think these are the people who are watching Avengers Endgame, right? So this is Thanos' justification of this, right? There's just too much of consumption happening. This is not sustainable. We're going to kill out each other. So either we just get rid of 50% of the population, so that the other 50% will leave. I mean, that's a very it's a very Thanos concept, right? So that's an Avengers concept. Now, whether as a government you'll be able to make those calls in terms of I will choose to support this sector and I will not choose to support that sector. I think market economics will determine who survives and who doesn't. And I think at this point in time, government also takes the viewpoint, or should take the viewpoint, that a lot of the supply chains are not easy. They are not as simple as like, I give you cash and you can do it. Because to build this economic value chains and to build my upline, downline suppliers, the whole global supply chain is not easy. Yep. It doesn't work just day after tomorrow. Even if I had all the money, even if SRF gave me $1 million, can I re-establish all these connections? No, not necessarily, because half the suppliers would have been dead, half the suppliers would not be able to supply me. So even I come out an MCO period, a lot of my clients may not exist, and a lot of my suppliers may not exist. A lot of my vendors may have actually gone out of business. So you literally have to reset the business landscape. And I don't think government should come in and determine who should survive and who shouldn't. Nobody should play God. I think that should be left to market dynamics to determine let the fittest survive at some point in time. What I think government should do is just ensure that the landscape is fair to everyone. So this crisis money, that 5 billion, handle the 5 billion SRF as crisis fund. Don't handle the 5 billion as like, oh, I give it to the best companies. You then might as well, then that's not crisis anymore. Then only the big boys will survive. Because as and when small companies, right? So as and when the SMEs come out, the big players will fill in the space. As and when one mom and pop shop goes up, the business goes to the hypermarket next door, right?
Yeah.
One Datuk Bruce eliminated from the system, the big players, worldwide players will take over your business. Your business is not going to go to another SME. So I think it will be futile, or it would not be in the interest of the government to actually determine who should survive and who shouldn't survive.
What you said, and you have given many examples, they are terribly complex. So we started with what keeps you awake. Now, what are your prayers before you go to sleep? Just give us your top 3 prayers, and these you hope would see some form of positive announcements next week.
All right. One is I just hope that we come out of MCO safer, which much less casualty, lesser number of people infected, and let's get out of this health issue first. I think as a citizen, I think all of us want to put health before economics, on a national level. But as somebody in business and somebody within the chamber organization, I think we also take a pragmatic view of businesses must survive, because the companies, the one curve that you don't want to see flattened is the recovery curve. So that recovery curve must be a very distinct V-shaped recovery. So all of us are hoping that V-shaped recovery will happen. Now we want to flatten the curve, right? So there's 2 different curves we're working on.
Yeah.
So I hope that all announcements...
You want to kill the virus and revive the economy. Yeah.
Yeah. We want to flatten the virus curve, and we want to, exponentially grow in the recovery curve. And so that recovery, I'm hoping that government will take the right steps, not only without negating the need to support the B40. I think that position all of us have taken. Yes, you must support, and we will do whatever is necessary, right, to keep prices low, to ensure that the supply chains are adequate, there is enough food outside there, to make sure all essential services are done. But as businesses, we must survive, because the B40, the employees are also dependent on the employers to ensure that there is job sustainability. So I think those are my, if anything, those are prayers that we have. Anyway, coronavirus, COVID-19 doesn't have religion, unfortunately. But if anybody believes, you should have a prayer. So I think those are the prayers.
Right. As a business owner, an entrepreneur right now, facing the crisis, what is your advice to them right now?
Conserve cash, and this is again my personal thing, right? So I've also told this to some of my close friends who within the first week call me up and says, hey, how to pay salary? I'm not getting any income. How to pay salary?
Or let me rephrase that. Let's not depend so much on governments. We are entrepreneurs. We are captains of our own destiny. So what do we do now, given the worst case scenario?
So that's the thing, right? So I think upfront, we should actually start talking to our own stakeholders, right? So these stakeholders are not only external, these stakeholders are also our staff. So let's be very, very upfront to start speaking to the employees and says, look, we are in this together. Let's come out of this alive so that we can start building back the company. So I think many colleagues and employees would be understanding if we upfront to them. 1. 2, I think it's time that many companies start conserving cash and take up all the moratoriums, all the facilities that are available, because we're really not sure, though all of us are hoping it will not last beyond April 15th. What happens if it's another 2 weeks?
Yeah.
Right. We really not sure when is the end point. So when we don't know where the end point is, at this point in time, it's always best to let's just conserve what we have to come back fighting when everything is else back to normal. And again, one other thing is, right, so I think many companies should also take this, I wouldn't say it's marketing, but I think the goodwill that we start building with our potential clients and also our existing clients, because if we keep our connections still alive, all those channels still open, and everybody negotiates. So I have a lot of, you still have a lot of bills to pay and a lot of bills to collect. I think if everybody is still talking, when we come out, the goodwill will still be there. Because the market will not forget you, and it will not be sympathetic to companies and businesses that took a very selfish attitude in the MCO period. So if you take in an MCO period and says, look, I'm not getting paid, I don't have business, I close shop, I don't care about what's happening. And if you intend to come back after MCO, you've got a tough call. Whereas those guys who have built goodwill, who have said, okay, let's do this together, I think those companies will actually have a much faster recovery.
That's a very positive advice. And on that positive note, I think we've come to the end of our program. So Datuk ATK, I would like to thank you for spending the afternoon with us and for sharing.
Thanks, Bruce, and thanks for calling me up.